Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
First guest is no stranger to you, former employee of NASA. He's a former special effects coordinator for films in Hollywood. He's got a great CV, great resume, this man. His website is whatreallyhappened.com. I said at the top of the programme, it's one of the great resources online today for information and analysis. He's a terrific radio host as well. You can catch his show, which goes out at 11 a.m. That's Oahu time. And it goes out, so I'm just trying to make, what time would that be then? That would be around about 1 p.m. Pacific time, I think, something like that. That's when it starts. He'll tell us the details in a minute. Let's welcome back to the programme for the first of the new year, our great friend Mike Rivero. Michael, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Richie. Thank you for having me back.
It's always good. Listen, I sent you, and you know I never try to Shanghai my guests or surprise them, but I just sent you a quick link there that I got tweeted about 3 minutes ago after I'd started the programme. Rather bizarre story in the Daily Mirror today, which, as you well know, is a British tabloid newspaper, suggesting that a former sex offender is going to design a doll, a childlike but lifelike doll, to help paedophiles, prevent them from committing crimes against children. And it's not a hoax, Mike. The world is kind of mad, isn't it?
I understand it's not a hoax here, and I think it's sort of encouraging a sense of tolerance for this kind of behavior, which, I'm nobody's idea of a saint. I was a wild child in my youth, but always with, women my own age, and I get some real strong instincts kicking in when I hear about children being used in this way. And I don't think it should be tolerated or accepted at all. And having this doll out there, I think, is almost legitimizing these kinds of practices, which, with all the members of the British media and government that seem to be caught up in this kind of behavior, maybe that's the goal, is to make this kind of behavior, if not socially acceptable, at least socially tolerable. But to be very honest, I don't know that it's going to work. It may, in fact, encourage these pedophiles to go on out and give vent to their desires in the real world. There was not too long ago, there was this idea that providing adult-size love dolls to sex offenders would discourage them from going on out and attacking real women. Unfortunately, that didn't work out.
Bizarre story, Michael. Yeah, we'll leave that there because it's only just come in. Apparently, this was in the Mirror today. I didn't see it. Crazy story. I like your suggestion that it might be in some way trying to garner sympathy for people who commit crimes against children, or empathy, or, as you said, tolerate it, especially in the times we're in now, particularly with the historic child sex abuse investigations ongoing here in the United Kingdom. Michael, a big story coming out of the BBC this afternoon here in England is, of course, the attack that took place in Jakarta today, the Indonesian capital. As the news as we have it at the moment, and you'll be on top of this as well, is that 2 civilians and 5 attackers bizarrely died in the assaults, and they were described to the BBC as some sort of an attempt to mimic the attacks in Paris. I lamented earlier on, and sometimes I feel like I'm boring myself as much as I might be boring my listeners, lamented the fact, Michael, that this is swallowed and then regurgitated by the media as fact. ISIS did it, that's the way it is, it's a fact, get on with it, and let's move on. How are you reading that situation in Jakarta today?
Well, I'm reading it exactly the same way that you are. Right now, the U.S. government is dealing with a growing problem in that some of the emails that have come out from the congressional investigation into Benghazi and Hillary Clinton's email server are continuing to confirm that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are actually creations of the U.S. government, of the Central Intelligence Agency, and the U.S. was smuggling weapons from Libya through that consulate in Benghazi to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria to overthrow Assad. And so the U.S. government is trying to basically get ahead of the propaganda ball, as it were, and remind everybody that ISIS is bad, that we should just hate them, and not pay attention to anybody who is pointing out the very obvious fact that the U.S. government is arming and supplying and running interference for them. Over in Iraq, the Iraqi government is saying the U.S. gets in the way of the Iraqi forces trying to recapture Iraq territory from ISIS. And so there's this huge deception going on. It's a manufactured enemy, like Emmanuel Goldstein in 1984. And they're trying to reassert that ISIS is bad and get us all back in line to just 2-minute hate on ISIS and paying no attention to the accumulating evidence that all of this is gigantic and tragic hoax.
Absolutely right. And did I or did I not see this week U.S. Army officials or Pentagon officials saying that they're going to restart this training the moderates program, Michael? I can't even say it without laughing.
I'm the same way yourself. I mean, it was a complete and utter failure before. What was going on was they set up this training of the so-called moderates and they gave them guns. And then, of course, the people who'd signed up for the training program turned out to be ISIS and Al-Qaeda, took their weapons and equipment and split. So, having had a complete, utter failure on their hands, let's go ahead and do it again and hope for the best. They've announced a new program of military garrisons across the Middle East, forgetting that they've already been doing that for the last 25 years. That isn't working. They're basically in thrash mode because this agenda to put puppet governments in charge of all the resource-rich areas of the Middle East is crumbling. It's falling apart. These nations are trying to break free as soon as they're conquered. The U.S. has had to go back into Iraq, now for the third time, Yemen for the second time, still trying to get into Syria, having to go back into Libya again, having to go back into Afghanistan again. And this was all supposed to have been completed by 2008, according to the information leaked by General Wesley Clark. And so the program is definitely off schedule. It's definitely over budget and shows, frankly, I don't think they can complete it. And our government is apparently in a rush to trigger a real bloody world war before the collapse of the economy. So they got somebody to blame it on. In fact, there's already news stories in the American corporate media today about how all the economic turmoil is actually being caused by ISIS, who have weaponized stock trading algorithms, and they're out there causing,
Michael, wouldn't you give, I don't know if any of your grandparents are still alive. I hope they are. But wouldn't you give your granny up just to have one presenter, to have the courage to speak to a Pentagon or a Washington official to say, come on, pull the other one? You want us to believe that this group that grew up out of the so-called Arab Spring, which of course we know was manufactured anyway, you want us to believe that this relatively small band of lunatic mercenaries whom you armed now have accounting departments, now have departments of education. Michael, I've never known anything as ridiculous as this. And I watch the news on a daily basis as you do, praying that at least just one presenter will risk their job. Because if they do and they get fired, I'll give them a job. To say, on air to a big audience of people, listen, how can they insult their intelligence by asking us to buy this nonsense?
Well, I think in a large measure, just out of desperation or a desire to believe, it looks like our government seriously thinks we're that dumb and seriously thinks the vast majority of Americans are still believing all these things we're being told. Obama on his State of the Union speech, the economy is doing great. And then, of course, the day after that, we have a major tank on the stock market. All the indicators are down. Today, the U.S. Treasury Department is out there saying, oh, yes, Obama has turned the economy around. You will believe it. And it seems like the motto of our government is, if at first you don't succeed, lie again, because that's all they know how to do. They have been running this country with lies, fraud, and deceptions for so many decades, they literally do not know any other way to run a country. And, of course, when you have a population which in polls indicates it's the U.S. federal government is the biggest problem in their lives, you understand that things are reaching a breaking point. And I am still convinced that at some point in the not too distant future, the U.S. government is going to collapse the way the former Soviet Union did, vanish into the dustbin of history. We're going to restart the country. We're going to forever ban private central banking and just sort of restart this country to take care of the country and its people rather than make a bunch of elites rich and powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing, Mike. I'm just thinking about, you talked there about the government assuming and understanding that the people are stupid and they buy it. And that skepticism is gone. And I was thinking there while you were talking, we have, I think, collectively lost our ability to be skeptical. We obviously have, because if we didn't, we'd be marching in the streets against this nonsense. And yet, Michael, in our communities and in our families, we haven't lost that ability. When one of our neighbours tells us something, we don't believe him. or we don't believe her. We're very skeptical about their claims, about their success at work or their success in life. We're very, we've got a healthy skepticism about what we're told in terms of the people we meet on a daily basis. But yet we lose that when it comes to our elected officials. I don't get it, Mike.
I'm not entirely sure that you're accurate, because certainly talking person to person around my part of the planet, even people who aren't really politically oriented, they're not paying attention, even they are saying it's reached ridiculous levels of lies and deceptions. I think the reason there aren't marches in the street is because there isn't a focal point for everybody to focus on. Like, there's one issue that everybody gets together and say, we have to march on this. You've got this group over here who's concerned about the cover-up of the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vince Foster. This group over here over Hillary's mishandling of classified information. You got this group over here asking if Hillary was actually conducting an espionage operation out of the State Department and using her charitable foundation to collect payments. There are so many lies. There isn't a single focus point that public outrage can center on right now.
A number of listeners made a comment on something I said in the monologue. You will probably have heard today that the Metropolitan Police have announced that there'll be 600 new armed police officers made available for London. And in the interview that Sir Bernard Hogan Howe, who heads up the Met Police, in the interview he gave to the media, he said two hilarious things. One is, we don't want to worry you, even though they keep flashing the colour-coded terror warding chart on telly all the time. You should be scared because an attack is imminent even. And then he said, intelligence is the best way. Intelligence is the best way. I made the point, of course, that every time we hear about an attack, or every time we hear about somebody who's left Britain to go to Syria to join ISIS, we then learn that this guy was known to the intelligence services all along, or the intelligence agencies all along. So that's utter nonsense. But I did say, Mike, that, we, and you particularly don't, on whatreallyhappened.com, you don't do fear porn. We don't do it here. But you've got to imagine, Michael, that in the near future, they've got some sort of attack plan for England. I'm talking about some sort of false flag attack. It just makes perfect sense that they would do that, particularly now with the new Snoopers Charter, which they will vote on in Parliament in a month's time, which gives them unprecedented powers to the intelligence agencies. Oh, look, okay, we're not stupid. We know they've been taking those liberties anyway in terms of the snooping. But to justify all this, Mike, I think they need a big attack, and I think one might be on the way.
I think that's a good assumption, and not just for Great Britain. Like I said earlier, the U.S. is trying to kick off a really bloody global war, so they got something to blame for the coming economic crash. And so there's going to be something that's going to happen to get us all riled up about ISIS again. As you know, we actually had this attempt to create a crisis with Iran. With the U.S. sailed these two boats full of Marines into Iranian territorial waters. I think they were hoping Iran would grab them and refuse to release them, or even better, fire on them, would have given Obama something to talk about at the State of the Union, and, of course, would have given the U.S. An excuse not to lift the Iranian sanctions now that Iran has complied with all the requirements of the P5+1. Iran did not take the bait. They came out and said, yeah, honest accident. They sent the men back. They're going to send the boats back. And now the U.S. is saying sanctions will be lifted this weekend. I would not be surprised to see something happen, possibly staged by Israel, in a last-ditch effort, as soon as tomorrow, to try and create a political climate where the U.S. and the European Union can say, well, we're justified in keeping these sanctions in place.
Yeah, that's a good point, that. And of course, it is interesting that Iran said, despite the sanctions being lifted on it, or her, I should say, we call countries by in the feminine, don't we? Despite Iran having sanctions lifted against it, the Iranians have said that they're going to put a block on American goods coming into the country, which I found kind of funny.
Well, tit for tat, sauce for the goose and everything. Plus the fact that, these days American products, far from being considered the best in the world, are viewed as overpriced, unreliable junk. They got lots of little stickers all over them to tell you the correct way to use it and whatnot. But American products just don't last anymore. Most of American products aren't even made in the U.S. anymore anyway. They're made in Asia. And why buy them through America with a profit markup when you can buy them direct from the Asian factories? So very clearly, the U.S. is in decline, despite what Obama said at the State of the Union speech. And I think they're trying to let the market down slowly to avoid a crash. But on the other hand, you've got the Federal Reserve and all those Wall Street banks, which started buying busted mortgage-backed securities and overpriced stocks going all the way back to 2008. And all of that stuff is still on their balance sheets. They can't let the stock market correct or they're going to be insolvent overnight. And so they're stuck. They have to keep on creating new money to keep on buying up the stocks as fast as other people are selling them. And that process, of course, only undermines trust in the dollar, because that's the only thing the dollar has for it is trust.
Of course, like every other currency. I've had an email from Alan Lyman. Alan is listening to the programme in Tel Aviv, believe it or not. And he's a long-time supporter of Michael Rivero, and he says he's been with your website since day one. So he wants to say hello to you from Tel Aviv, Alan. Alan says, Richie, would you ask Michael, is there any truth to some of these independent media stories about very sick seals turning up on the Pacific coast of the United States? Now, Michael, again, if you haven't come across this, you don't have to answer this, but there were a number of other alternative media sources claiming earlier this week, and in fact over the Christmas period, that wildlife, the signs are obvious now on wildlife on the Pacific coast of the United States that something is very, very, very badly wrong. And of course, this all, leads to Fukushima. Have you come across those stories, Mike, about the seals, and is there any truth to any of this?
Well, certainly, there are strange die-offs along the Pacific coast of the Americas. Could be Fukushima, but you also need to remember we're finishing up a summer where we had a record-setting El Nino warming current, and the El Nino warming current comes from undersea volcanoes. I mean, if you look at a map of the floor of the ocean over at that little peak in the west where the El Nino current first appears, you will see, just hundreds of volcanic cones all over the ocean floor. There's no way to know how many are erupting at any given time. And along with putting heat into the ocean, it's also putting in some very toxic chemicals, hydrogen sulfide, huge amounts of methane, which are going to draw the free oxygen out of the water. So it could be a combination of multiple factors. I wouldn't rule out Fukushima, but I would also say we have to take into account the effluents from the volcanoes that are the source of the El Nino current.
What did you make of the State of the Union debacle the other night? A couple of listeners have asked me to ask you about that. I didn't cover it in any great depths apart from, mocking one or two of the statements made by Obama. But these things generally are an opportunity for the lawyer-in-chief, whether it's Obama or Bush or Father Bush, to say that everything is hunky-dory, basically. That's what it appears to us outside the United States. What did you make of it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The State of the Union is the president comes on out and he says everything is great and this is what we're going to do for you. This was Obama's last State of the Union address, and he was focusing in large part on trying to establish what his legacy will be, which includes this claim that he has rescued the economy from the devastation caused by the preceding presidents. Of course, that's absolutely not true. But Obama is now in his last year in office, and he's starting to think about his place in the history books. And he's got a huge ego. When he was out there doing his speech about gun control right after the new year, he just kept saying, I, something he referred to himself something like 40 times in a 30-minute speech. And to me, it looks like he is suffering from narcissistic personality disorder, which unfortunately is a common ailment for high-level politicians.
You mentioned gun control. We've got you for about another 5 minutes, then I'll let you go. You got to prepare for your own programme. What a pro Rivero is. What a pro. He comes on. I wouldn't do it, Mike. It's funny, you do it. You're great to come on. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't go on a show so close to the beginning of my own. But then again, I'm not as smooth and as suave as the boy Rivero, I have to say. No, I mean that sincerely.
Nowhere, but don't stop trying.
But don't stop trying anyway. You talked about gun control there. Listen, I don't doubt that it was a genuine accident. The shooting of that young girl in Pennsylvania, the 12-year-old girl. The circumstances seem to be pretty awful. Allegedly, I don't know if it's true or not, but allegedly her dad pulled a gun on a constable. And in the panic, the 12-year-old girl was shot dead. But a number of our listeners who are in the United States and who are very concerned about the overtures from the White House about, gun control and, the Second Amendment and all of that. They're saying, well, there's never any talk about controlling the supply of guns to the police when you see things like this. This is a terrible case, Michael. Is it cut and dry, this? Is it a case of her father being a bad guy, pulled a gun on the police officer and she was accidentally killed? What do you make of this?
Well, it's hard to know because, unfortunately, the police have been caught fabricating their stories after these civilians get killed. It's become an epidemic problem. The police are being turned into an oppressive force in the United States. And last year, the police departments of the United States murdered more innocent Americans than all the mass shooters and terrorists put together. And it is a significant problem. Now, as far as surrendering our guns and being dependent on the police, there are a couple of problems with that. When a crime is actually being committed, there are only two parties there, the perpetrator and the victim. And if you want to stop the crime, you have to give the victim the right and the means to defend themselves. To act as a deterrent. The police show up after the crime is long over. They pose with the dead bodies to get their picture in the newspaper, and they think they're somehow relevant. But it's really absurd. In the United States, if you dial 911, which is our emergency phone number, it can take anywhere from 15 to 22 minutes for the police to even show up in the first place. And by then, the criminal's done what they're going to do, and they're long gone. And the other problem is the cops may not show up at all. There was a very famous case in Georgetown near Washington, D.C., where these three women were heard a break-in into their home. They called the police, 911. Police said, we'll get there. The perpetrators basically took these three women and sexually abused them all night long, didn't leave until sunrise the next morning. The women sued the Washington, D.C. police, and the court said, look, there actually is no law saying the police are obligated to come and protect you from violent criminals. So, no, you can't sue the police if they decide they're not going to show up and place themselves at risk. So when you have that kind of a legal precedent, and, under the civil forfeiture laws, the police are stealing more from the American people than the criminals. I think more and more Americans are saying, I'm going to take responsibility for defense of my home against crime, and I have a natural right to do that. The government has no right to disarm me and make me a wide open target for criminals. It kind of makes you wonder what side the government is on, the side of the law-abiding citizen, or if we have a criminal society because we have a criminal government.
Absolutely. Absolutely final question, a very final question. Got to ask you this. Do you still think, we last spoke, of course, just before Christmas, do you still think, and I know this is very complicated for you, but I'll ask you anyway, do you still think that of the craven bunch of, I would say, idiots standing to become the next president of the United States, do you still believe that Trump is the best of a bad bunch?
I think Trump is, I like Trump because he is an outsider. I like Trump because he's got his own money. He can't be bought. He's going to do what he thinks he wants to do. And that's why the GOP are terrified of him. Even his own party is trying to get him out of this race somehow because he will not do what the financial backers of the political parties want him to do. And for that very reason, I think it's time we get somebody like Trump in there. We're going to have to back him up with a Congress that is going to be willing to work with him. And I am predicting we're going to see a tremendous anti-incumbency fever sweeping this country in the coming elections, where, there's even talk that John McCain may lose his Senate seat this year.
No harm in that, Mike.
The American people are just fed up with politics as usual, corruption as usual, sellouts as usual. They're sick and tired of all the Israel firsters out there saying that we have to send our money and your children to save Israel every time they attack another country. And I think Americans have really reached a breaking point on that.
Certainly do. And this is the absolutely final question, because you did mention the dollar collapse. Friends of ours, including Gerald Salente and the dollar vigilante, Jeff Berwick, they're saying that it's imminent, Mike. Do you go along with that? Is the dollar collapse imminent in terms of next year, this year?
I would be very surprised if we reach the end of this year with our economic system still intact. We're seeing incredible chaos on the equities markets. They're not even trying to hide the fact that they're having to rig things to try and keep the market looking good. In the process of rigging the markets higher, they've destroyed what's called the risk interest pricing mechanism, and that means nobody can really estimate the damage that's going to happen when it does start to unwind and the panic sets in.
Have a great show, Michael, and enjoy the coming weekend. Lovely to chat with you. We'll catch up again in February. It's always a pleasure, my friend.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye for now. Michael Rivero. Check out whatreallyhappened.com. That's where you'll find Mike. You'll find links to previous radio shows by Mike. His radio show is terrific, by the way. Very newsy, very matter of fact. And Michael is very factual in terms of what he says. And like us, when he is stating an opinion, he says it's an opinion.